ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Unless you know how to cast a Zombify. That's right. In today's episode of Judges Corner, we're going to be talking about what happens when creatures die.
Judges Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and gatheringmagic.com. Support our show by visiting both websites. Now it's time for Judges Corner with David Green.
So, creatures die when they're sent from the battlefield to the graveyard. It doesn't really matter how they wound up 6 feet under, be it through a deadly bout of combat, or perhaps they were sacrificed to something greater than themselves. Maybe they became violently ill, or maybe they were just outright destroyed. So long as they go from the battlefield to the graveyard, they're considered to have died. And then, of course, anything that cares about that will occur. So next, let's go ahead and take a look at some things that care about creatures dying. So, if a doomed traveler were to face off against an annoyed Liliana of the Veil, Liliana's -2 effect will cause the ill-fated human to die and release its soul. Murder it, and you'll find a lingering spirit raised from the traveler's dead body. Sicken it by giving it -1/-1, and the traveler will haunt you. Beat our weary traveler to death, and his soul will remain. Basically, just like I said, if a creature from point A, the battlefield, then goes to point B, the graveyard, that creature will die. And, of course, in this case, it'll trigger, leaving a 1/1 flying spirit creature token in its place. But if you send our traveler on a journey to nowhere, you'll find he takes his soul with him into exile. Should Liliana cause him to be discarded, then you'll see that he never actually manifests a soul on the battlefield because he never died. Boomerang him from whence he came, or even further, grip-tied him to before he was even thought up, or even counter him straight out, and you'll find that his soul stays with him. What I'm trying to say is that when a doomed traveler goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, he will trigger because he died in all of the first group of our examples. But in our second group of examples, he never died because being exiled or discarded or bounced or tucked or countered does not result in the creature being sent from the battlefield to the graveyard. Of course, there are a couple of things that will trigger, even if they are exiled or boomeranged, like Faceless Butcher or Angel of Serenity. But that's because their effects don't care if they die, because they specifically say when they leave the battlefield. Some creatures avoid hitting the graveyard altogether, replacing the act with something else. Progenitus, for example, has a hard time dying, and some effects don't care how the card gets to the grave, so long as it gets there. Bloodchief Ascension is a good example of this, triggering off of things that die or are discarded or even countered. However, a neat thing to note with Bloodchief Ascension is that it won't trigger off of spirit tokens dying. Sure, tokens can die too. They hit the graveyard and trigger effects that care about dying just like any other creature. Then the token goes poof and ceases to exist. But Bloodchief Ascension specifically cares about cards that hit the graveyard. That means real magic cards with real magic backs from real magic sets, not tokens generated by other cards or effects, even if they are an identical copy to a real card, just like with a copy of Pack Rat. Finally, things that aren't creatures can't die, but they can do everything else that dying creatures do when they perish. Dies refers specifically to the act of a creature being sent from the battlefield to the graveyard. Other non-creature permanents don't have a word or a term for being sent to the graveyard from the battlefield. They just go there. So, cards like Disciple of the Vault, that says, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life, will trigger off of any artifact that is put into the graveyard, like a cranial plating that was destroyed, or an Arcbound Ravager that sacrifices itself to move another counter around to something else. So, die is just a term introduced in Magic 2012 to shorten that line of text on creatures. It was slang that a lot of players used already to refer to when a creature left play the same way. So Wizards adopted it to make text boxes smaller and more intuitive. So, that's it for episode. If you have any questions about this episode or any other Magic questions in general, go ahead and shoot us an email at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com. And it might get featured in a special mailbag episode. Sound good to you? So, until next time, make sure to shuffle thoroughly, play at a reasonable pace, and don't dead, open inside.